Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is yet another TV show review, and I'm going to be talking about another season of South Park. This time around, it's season 5. And while I did like season 4, I like this season a lot more, and I would probably say that this is one of the best seasons that I can remember of this show. Like, this is when the show really started to hit its stride. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this season, I would like to give a special shout out to Ryan for requesting this review. And if there is another TV show, film, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal, my Patreon, or my Cash App. Links to all three are in the video description down below, and I will try to get your requests as soon as I possibly can. Now, season 5 of South Park, it started airing in June of 2001, and then it ended in December of that year. And it was actually a shorter season. In fact, it started a new trend for the show, where instead of it being like 17 episodes long, it was 14 episodes until the 16th season. It became definitely more of a standard for the show. Now, I do think that standard didn't really start until season 8, though, because I think there were some discrepancies with some of the seasons that came out after this. But it's definitely a decision that the showrunners decided to make for the long run for a pretty long amount of time. And it's the right one. I honestly felt like the previous season was a little too long. So this season, okay, you have less episodes, but that means that you have less filler episodes. And to me personally, there is literally only one bad episode in this season. Like, every episode is firmly above average or great to me. This is a really great season in terms of the percentage of worthwhile episodes. And once again, you got the main cast that is just doing an amazing job voicing all these different characters. Trey, Matt, Eliza, Mona Marshall, Isaac Hayes. And this one doesn't have as many guest stars, though. This just really has Radiohead, who plays uh, themselves in one of the episodes. Because really, it's just mostly just Trey Parker, Matt Stone, Elijah Schneider, Mona Marshall, and Isaac Hayes. Now, the first episode is called It Hits the Fan. Now, this is one of my picks for one of the lesser episodes of this season, but it's still a fun watch. I think this episode might have played out better if I didn't watch it uncensored. Like, if I saw it on Comedy Central and the curse words were bleeped, but certain curse words weren't, I think it might have had more of an impact and be funnier. Because watching this episode uncensored, it just kind of doesn't really feel like it's that impactful. And it definitely feels like this is really trying to be a satirical episode that's trying to poke fun about curse words and how people tend to overrate the usage of curse words in television, like it's a big deal. And also how if you use it too much, you can really limit the overall impact of the word and it can be less funny. And that's why it's called It Hits the Fan, because it's a reference to the common term, shit hits the fan. Because it's all about the curse word shit. Because there's this crime drama, this cop show that is having a promotion, that is mentioning how they're going to say the word shit uncensored, and it winds up becoming this massive hit for the network, and they start having more and more episodes with characters saying the word shit, and then they decide to make an entire block of shows with everybody just saying shit. And the town of South Park is going crazy over this because it's South Park. That's a boring town in the middle of Colorado in bumfuck nowhere. So this is a pretty exciting thing for them. And because of the fact that the word shit has become so I wouldn't say well, but so utilized by the network and by people in South Park and just people in general, it unleashes a plague where people get sick, get like boils, turn green, then vomit the organs up and die. And that's when you find out that it's a literal curse word. The reason why the term curse word exists is because of the fact that if you say these words too many times, then it's going to cause a curse. And the shit curse is the plague. And Chef helps the kids, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, Kenny, find information about the curse words, and teams up with them along with these knights called the Knights of Standards and Practices, which is clearly trying to be a reference to censorship. And the Knights of Standards and Practices, they wake up from their slumber every time people use a curse word too many times. And once a curse word is used enough times, a giant dragon appears and it starts terrorizing the land. And the only way to defeat it is with some runestone. And the kids eventually manage to do so. They defeat the dragon with the runestone, and South Park and the rest of the world is saved before shit really hits the fan. But this episode is at its best to me when it's just poking fun at the absurdity of censorship. When you have a counter that appears at the bottom of the screen that shows every time the word shit is said in the episode, and then also the hypocrisy and the double standards. The whole thing with Mr. Garrison and him being able to say the gay slur, and him explaining how I can say it, but you can't because you're not gay. And then there's this really hilarious scene in the bar where he's using the slur, and he's also saying the saying shit, and there's this one guy who says the gay slur, and he's the only one that isn't bleeped out of everybody else in the bar. And so then he pauses for a second. He's like, "Wait, what? Am I gay?" And then you have the whole thing where it's like, "Why was I not bleeped?" Because then he realizes that there was that whole. I don't think he actually said he. I don't think he actually asked it. Wait, am I gay? He actually says, "Wait, why wasn't I bleeped?" And then Mr. Garrison is like, "Oh, you want to go make out later?" That cracked me up. And so did the scene at the boardroom of the network when the Knight of Standards and Practices shows up and just cuts one of their heads off. Uh, that that was also a pretty hilarious scene as well. I still like the episode, but it's not as good as a lot of the episodes in this season. But it's still a decent episode. Episode 2 of this season is Cripple Fight. And by the way, most of these episodes are either directed by Trey Parker or written by Trey. There are some few differences here and there. Like Eric Stowe directed some of the episodes, but most of the episodes are written and directed by Trey Parker. and he does a great job. Now, Cripple Fight, this is the one where you get the new kid with disabilities, um, which is Jimmy. You get the first appearance of Jimmy, and it's quite the first impression for that character. I've always liked Jimmy more than Timmy anyway, and them having a rivalry in this actually worked, and it was honestly really funny, even though it's kind of messed up. So what happens is it deals with the Boy Scouts. So you have Big Gay Al, who is definitely a stereotypical kind of controversial character, but in all honesty, the way the character was written was pretty respectful, in my opinion, despite him being this giant, stereotype of homosexuals. He was portrayed as a person with a good heart and like a legitimately good guy who just happens to be gay, and he winds up taking over the spot as the boys' new troop leader for Scouts. And this, of course, raises the ire of the parents who are, a bunch of homophobes, and they don't want him being the Boy Scout leader, even though he's actually a really good Scout leader and he had been in Scouts for most of his life. And he eventually gets fired by the Boy Scouts of America because of the pressure by the parents, and this causes the kids to get a new troop leader who is this really authoritarian asshole who happens to be a pedophile, and it just shows you that you can make certain assumptions about people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're true, and the alternative can be so much worse for your kids. And so you have this military strict authoritarian new troop leader who's a pedophile, and of course the kids, they don't want this jerk being their troop leader anymore, so they decide to set up this protest and decide to create a bit of a controversy to get Big Gay Al brought back as the troop leader. But it doesn't really work right away. They try to get people to sign a petition, but it's not really doing much of anything because, a lot of people don't really give a shit about gay rights and gay representation. And what causes them to get attention from the national media and ultimately give Big Gay Al the opportunity to be able to get his job back is a cripple fight. Is Timmy and Jimmy fighting each other in a parking lot. And that was the culmination of this rivalry between Timmy and Jimmy, because Timmy is used to being, the disabled kid in South Park who's, getting the special treatment, or, he's getting the attention, and Jimmy comes along and takes a lot of that spotlight away, and he's able to win the South Park kids over, and just South Park over in general, with his sense of humor, and that just pisses Timmy off. And so Timmy and Jimmy actually wind up getting into a fight. And to be fair, Jimmy was kind of a dick too, especially to Timmy. So when you ultimately get to the cripple fight, there's actually some real tension behind it. And the fight itself is one of the most hilarious moments in this season. It is so funny. And it honestly reminds me of the fight in They Live, like the really long fight between Roddy Piper and Keith David in that movie. Like I think that was definitely the inspiration here, and it's really inspired and just hilarious. And then eventually the cripple fight gets enough attention by the media and by pundits and everything that they reverse the decision. Big Gay Al is given back his job. the other troop leaders arrested and sent to jail for being a pedo. And I like the message at the end where Big Gay Al's like, I appreciate this, but this isn't what I want. This isn't how I wanted this. I'm all about representation and having, gay people, in the scouts and everything, but I don't want it like this. And the way that it skewered people like Gloria Allred, who are people who are aura farmers, people who just try to take responsibility or take a win out of a situation like this, even when it's not necessarily deserved, especially on their part. Uh, that was really great satire. And it was just a really clever, well written episode with a hilarious They Live inspired fight. And just a really good example of the type of writing that the show would become known for, where it's got biting, sharp satire, with silly, absurd comedy, like a cripple fight. Now, episode 3 is called Super Best Friends. This is another one I really loved. This one is the first of many times that the show would parody Scientology and poke fun at it and religion. And David Blaine comes to South Park and he wows the locals with his tricks, including one where he has a guy pull a card out of his own ass. And he has a follower, like a devout Blaine fan, who winds up brainwashing the kids, except for Stan, because Stan doesn't want to go along with it because he sees through all this bullshit. Because this follower is a member of Blaintology, which is clearly trying to be a take on Scientology. And this is definitely an episode that's really satirizing cult mindsets and just cults in general in a really clever way, and just religion as a whole. And the kids, they follow the teachings of Blaintology. They shave their heads. They all dress the same. And it's also David Blaine and his religion can get a tax break, so that they can become tax exempt. And Stan winds up getting a hold of Jesus and gets his help in order to stop David Blaine, because David Blaine and his Blaintologists, they didn't get what they wanted initially. So they decide to take extreme measures by having a mass suicide at the Lincoln Memorial. And Stan hears about the plan, and so he goes to Jesus, asks him for help. Jesus gets the other super best friends, which is a bunch of other religious deities from different religions: Buddha, Joseph Smith, Muhammad, as well as Seaman, who isn't really a religious deity. He's just a knockoff of Aquaman. That was one of the weaker aspects of the episode, I have to be honest. But I did crack up at Buddha, messing with him and calling him Seaman. And eventually, it all culminates in this insane, crazy finale that's like straight out of Super Friends. And that's entirely the whole point of it. It's like a warped, messed up version of Super Friends. And it deals with David Blaine and his followers trying to do this mass suicide and at the Lincoln Memorial in the reflecting pool. But because the pool is only like a certain amount of inches deep, which is not very deep at all, they have to lay down face first and just stay there for long enough for them to drown. And this leads to a repeated gag where Cartman, he's trying to drown himself repeatedly, but he can't because he's too fat. And so the super best friends, they eventually destroy David. Well, they don't destroy David Blaine. They do stop him, because they have to stop him from getting tax exempt status, because if he gets it, then he will be just like them and he'll be another religious deity and he'll take over the world. And Blaine uses his magic power to uh, bring the statue of Abraham Lincoln to life, and then it just starts wrecking Washington, D.C. And then there's this really hilarious scene with Jesus and Moses, who's like the supercomputer at the super best friends hideout. And Jesus just goes up to him and asks Moses for advice. And he just asks him this question: Moses, how do you stop a giant stone Abraham Lincoln? And Moses just pauses in an awkward, hilarious way, just like, a giant stone John Wilkes Booth. it's so, it's so Jesus and the Super Friends, they build a giant stone John Wilkes Booth, and then it shows up behind the giant stone Abraham Lincoln and just shoots him in the back of the head. It's dumb, but it's hilarious. It's so funny. And then, of course, Cartman is still trying to kill himself, and Joseph Smith uses his freezing powers to be to be able to. And I believe, yeah, I think it's Joseph. Yeah, Joseph Smith, Krishna, Lozi. I forgot some of them, but yeah, Joseph Smith. He uses his freezing powers to freeze the pool, and Cartman is like, "Oh man, I was really gonna do it this time." So yeah, that's a really fun episode. I really like that one. Just a really brilliant takedown of Scientology, and then just a fun parody of the Super Friends, and it was just a really enjoyable, fun episode. The next episode is one of the most infamous episodes of the show, and definitely one of the best episodes of this season. And honestly, I would probably say one of the best episodes of the show in general. Episode 4 is Scott Tenorman Must Die. And this is honestly one of the first episodes I remember seeing. Because I remember seeing this on Comedy Central. And I was just completely blown away by how messed up this episode was. But also how darkly and just genuinely funny it is, too. This is the episode that deals with Cartman and his war with Scott Tenorman, where Cartman is punked, essentially, by Scott Tenorman numerous times, who convinces Cartman, that he's got to buy pubic hair, and that's how you become an adult, or that's how you get to puberty. You have to buy pubic hair, and it just starts from the very beginning in hilarious fashion because Cartman is bragging about his pubic hair and he's got pubes to Stan and Kyle and Kenny while they're waiting for the bus, and he mentions that he bought the pubic hair from Scott Tenorman, and then all the kids just rag on him and give him shit because he's a dumbass, and then Cartman tries to go and get his money back, but then Scott Tenorman just keeps screwing him over. He sends him off to some other part of South Park or outside the town to this location where there's supposedly a pube fair where he can get all of his extra money for the pubes, but he just finds nothing there except a guy who gives him a box with more pubes. And then there was like another bit where he tried to beg for the money back because he lied about his grandmother dying, and he needed the exact amount of money for his grandmother, and Scott initially seemingly falls for it, but then he pulls the sleight of hand trick and basically manipulates him by talking real fast and then using sleight of hand to be able to steal more money from Cartman. And eventually, because Tenorman's getting the better of Cartman, which is something that rarely ever happens, Cartman is usually not the one that is getting pranked. He's not the one that's getting tormented like this. He can't stand it. And so he comes up with this absolutely devilish and diabolical plan to get back at Scott Tenorman. And initially, you think that it's one way. He's just going to set things up where he's going to train a pony to bite his penis off in front of Radiohead. But then you have the reveal at the end, which is genuinely shocking. I remember when I first saw this episode, I was speechless, to be perfectly honest. And I know I was probably not the only one when it comes to this episode, because Cartman has this chili cook-off, this chili fair. And Radiohead does eventually show up because he's using Radiohead because he finds out that Scott is a big fan of them. But the whole thing with the pony was just a distraction. It was just something that he was going to use as a part of his greater plan, because he knew that his friends, Stan, Kyle, and Kenny, were going to rat on him. So he set it up where he would make them think that his plan is to have the pony and, biting Scott's penis off, his wiener off in front of Radiohead. But the real plan is to use the pony as a way for Scott's parents to go to the farm where the pony is, the ranch where the pony is, and then have Scott's parents get shot to death by the owner of the ranch, who is somebody who doesn't allow any trespassers and will shoot on sight. And then Cartman somehow gets a hold of Scott's parents' bodies, grinds them up, and puts them in the chili, which he then feeds to Scott Tenorman, because Scott thinks he's going to get Cartman back with Cartman eating chili with pubes, but Cartman is already one step ahead of him there and switches that out with chef's chili, and he's eating delicious chili while Scott Tenorman is eating chili with his dead parents in it. And it's unbelievably messed up. It's crossing so many lines, but it's so Cartman. He is a little psychopathic shit. And this is like him at his most psychopathic and most devious. And just the way that he's just loving the torment that he's putting this kid into. And it escalates and it becomes everything that he wanted it to be and then some, because Radiohead sees Scott Tenorman crying and then calls him a loser, and then he winds up doing that scene where he's licking Scott Tenorman's tears off his face and like, the tears of unfathomable sadness. It's just it's so messed up. It's so screwed up. But it's so screwed up and so messed up in such an over-the-top way that it becomes funny. Like, it's actually a really great example of dark, twisted comedy. And I love dark humor. And this was just so dark. But because it's just so out there, it reaches the point of just being uproariously funny. At least to me personally. I know for some people it's too much, a little too cruel. I get it. But the fact that Cartman was a big fan of Hannibal Lecter, and he liked the movie Hannibal, and that was like one of that should have been a red flag to begin with. That should have been a hint of the kind of diabolical shit that he had planned. But just the way that it all unfolds, and it's really clever. And it's dark, it's twisted, but it is iconic for a reason. The next episode is a lot less messed up, but it still has some messed up stuff in it because, it's definitely the kind of stuff that South Park is known for. But episode 5 is called Terrence and Phillip Behind the Blow, and this one deals with the boys, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, Kenny. They're trying to reunite Terrence and Phillip because they had a split and they haven't been together for years, haven't done a show for years. And they don't find that out until they buy tickets to see Terrence and Phillip live. But then they see that it's just, I think it was just Terrence. Yeah, they see that it's just there's only one of them. Um, yeah, they're just Terrence is there, and you're like, wait, what? Like that's not what we paid for. And to make matters worse, they are essentially forced to reunite Terrence and Philip because they were able to get out of preparing for some Earth Day festival from their school and go to the concert because they promised that they would be able to get Terrence and Philip to be there for the Earth Day festival. And apparently, the Earth Day people, like the environmentalists, are super extreme and will like kill you or cut your limbs off, or if you don't do what they say. And they're also like brainwashing people. And that was a bit of satire that I think was not as clever as a lot of other things that South Park has done before. But I still didn't mind this episode because of the fact that you have some callbacks to the movie, so it's kind of a companion to that. And then not only that, you have a backstory, like a behind the blow, which is definitely a take of behind the music. It's a take on that. The popular show that was on VH1 back in the day. And so you get to see like a parody of Behind the Music called Behind the Blow, but about Terrence and Phillip, and that was fun. Terrence and Phillip is definitely a one note fart joke, kind of gag, but I like the Behind the Blow bit quite a bit, and that made it work for me despite the kind of wonky forced humor they were trying to do with the Earth Day people. But it was still fun. It was a fun episode, not on the same level of Scott Tenorman Must Die or Super Best Friends or even Cripple Fight, but it was better than hits the fan. Um, Episode 6 is Cartman Land. This is one of my favorite episodes of this season, and honestly, one of my favorite episodes of the show. Uh, this one deals with Cartman, who actually winds up getting $1 million inheritance from his grandmother. And he uses that $1 million to buy a theme park so he can ride the rides by himself and not have to deal with any lines. And he even makes an advertisement for the park so he can just brag about how he's got this awesome park and how nobody can come, and especially Stan and Kyle. And I love the bit where after he's forced to hire more people for the park in order to, keep Stan and Kyle out, because he's trying to keep them out of the park because they keep trying to sneak in. So he has to hire a security guard. So in order to have security, he has to let more people into the park to pay security. And then there's all this other stuff that is going on with the park. Now it needs maintenance for the rides because there's a ride that's broken. So now he's got to have more people come in. The maintenance guy wants to have concessions at the park. So then he's got to hire the concessions people. And then it just gets to the point where the park is like busy and it's making really good business, unlike what it was doing before when Cartman got the park initially from the original owner. And you have people on the media who were talking about this successful turnaround, and now all these different businesses are copying the formula of "you can't come." So you have these hilarious cutaway gags to these different businesses that are implementing this strategy, like a restaurant that's like, "Oh, nope, we're not having any reservations today. You can't come in. You can't eat here." Or the retail stores that are all like, "Nope, you can't come in. You can't come in the store. You can't buy anything." I thought that was really smart and really clever satire. And then you have this subplot that's also really great with Kyle, where he gets a hemorrhoid in his ass. And this is around the time that Cartman has got $1 million, has his own park. And because of this, it causes Kyle to lose faith in God. And he has his hemorrhoid burst when he's trying to sneak into the park. and then he essentially begins to give up on life. And despite the efforts of his parents who try to make him feel better, which fails miserably because they tell him the story of Job from the Bible. And this is just one of many things about this show that just does such a great job really skewering religion and the hypocrisy and just the overall absurdity of it. And like the whole thing of Job has always been something, and even when I first read that I was like, well, what, really? So God did all this because he decided to essentially make a bet with Satan. So he screwed this guy over, uh, had marauders come over and kill all his workers, kill his cows, caused his farm to collapse in on itself, killed his family, gave him boils and sores all over his body, just to test him like a sadistic asshole, and just to see if whether or not he will still have faith in him after all of this. Now, apparently, the episode did leave out the bit where Job did get a lot of that stuff back from God, but it wasn't his actual wife. It wasn't all these things that God took away from him. He healed him from the boils and whatever, but he could have done all this. He could have just brought his actual family to life. He could have just undid all of that other nonsense, all of that other messed up shit that he did to him. But no, said he didn't. And so he just got all this other stuff, which isn't really necessarily an adequate replacement, if you ask me. So I still think the episode was spot on in terms of how it pointed out how ridiculous that whole story is. And Kyle just really just gives up. The hemorrhoid is traveling from his ass to his lungs. And eventually, what causes the hemorrhoid to go away and causes him to have faith in life again is Cartman getting his comeuppance. Because Cartman, because of the fact that he doesn't realize when he's got a good thing, because he wants things his way, the park is doing amazing, but he can't stand it. So he decides to sell the park back to the original owner. And he gets his $1 million back, but the IRS comes in and they take a portion of it, and then they take the rest of it because Kenny died on one of the rides earlier and his parents sued. So now Cartman's left with nothing, and Kyle, thanks to Stan, he's able to see all of this and Cartman's crash out, and now Kyle is healed. And it's definitely one of those episodes that has a great amount of catharsis to it at the end. Because at the beginning, you're like, oh, really? Cartman gets $1 million? Like, what? This little shit gets $1 million? But then he gets his comeuppance in the end, and it's glorious. So yeah, that's a classic episode. Episode 7 is called Proper Condom Use. This is another really smart, clever, satirical episode. This is all about sex education for kids, and just pointing out how ridiculous and over the top and silly it is. And it all starts because Cartman shows the boys a trick that he learned from some 5th grader called Red Rocket, where you take a dog and you essentially beat it off. And they're kids. They don't know what beating off is. They don't know about that kind of stuff yet. And so they just think that, oh, we're just doing some trick with the dog. And one of the kids does it in front of the parents. And so the parents are appalled. So then they essentially force the school to start teaching sex education to the students. And initially, it's only to like the 5th grader, the 4th graders, to the to the kids, the 3rd and 4th graders. But because of the fact that things don't seem like they're really catching on enough for the kids, according to the parents, then it becomes something where they're teaching them sex ed at even younger ages, like kindergarten. So, so you've got Mr. Garrison, who's like teaching kindergartners about sexual positions and how to put on a condom. Then you have all the other stuff with, the other teachers, who are just completely incompetent, have no idea what they're talking about in terms of sex, or sex education. Mr. Mackey hasn't had sex in forever, and neither has Miss Chokes on Dick. So Mr. Mackey is talking about how sex works, and he pauses in the middle of the presentation because he forgets how the penis is supposed to be inserted into the vagina because it's been like 20 years since he's had sex. And this is the episode where you get a really horrifying image of Chokes on Dick and Mackie having sex, but just the way that it completely lambasts the sex education argument for younger kids is just really smart and funny. But it's also clever, and it makes a legitimate point. And then it creates a gender war between the boys and the girls that really ultimately leads to a parody of the Road Warrior, because the girls create their own stronghold and then the boys decide that they're gonna infiltrate it, and Butters dresses up like Humongous from the Road Warrior, and it is honestly one of the funniest things ever. Just the image of Butters, with his, high pitched, unassuming voice, and then he puts on the mask, and then he's doing the whole Humongous voice, and he's got the deep voice now, and he's all like, just walk away. It just kills me every time. It is so funny. And it just points out that there's a right time to teach kids these things. This is not the time to do that because they're not going to know uh, how to really handle this. And a lot of the teachers aren't going to really know how to teach it properly. They're going to zero in and obsess about STDs. And then that's going to cause the girls to think that the boys are just carriers of nothing but disease and don't want anything to do with them, want to quarantine themselves from the boys. And then the boys are going to find out that the girls are the ones that give them the STDs, so then they're going to want to do the same to the girls, and then they're going to be pissed at the girls because they're like, oh, well, you're the one that has the diseases anyway. Why are you getting upset at us? And then you have the whole thing about the pregnancy and all of this. It's just, and condom usage, and then sexual positions, and it is just pure insanity. And that's exactly what it is if you're trying to teach kids that young those kind of things. So just a really brilliant episode, a really funny episode too, with a very unexpected, out of nowhere Road Warrior parody. Episode 8 is called Towley, and it's another fun episode. It deals with Towley, the talking towel, who just wants to get high, and the kids, they wind up getting this latest video game console called the Okama Game Sphere from one of the boys' parents, because Cartman finds a used tampon, and the mom doesn't really want to explain it to the kids, so she just shuts them up by buying this game console. And then the kids run into Towley, and then Towley winds up becoming a big part of this conspiracy because they have to bring Towley to the government because their game sphere has been taken away from them, and it's like a ransom where it's like, oh, you got to give us the towel, or we're gonna destroy your game sphere. And so the kids reluctantly join this mission to bring Towley to this corporation that he supposedly comes from, and to bring him to safety. But then you find out that it's the opposite, and this paramilitary group is actually the real good guys, and they're the ones that are trying to stop Dynacorp and stop Towley from becoming this weapon. And just the sheer amount of not giving a shit that the kids have throughout this episode, the apathy is really funny. They're in this crazy mission with paramilitary and aliens because it's revealed that Dynacorp is aliens on Earth, and they don't give a shit because they just want their game console back. And they're only doing this because that's how they're going to get their game console back, and they just want to be able to play video games again. And it's so over the top. It's so ridiculous. It's so dumb when it comes to just how insanely complicated the plot is. But it works because it acts as a satire of those kind of plots. And then you have the stuff with the kids just being so uh, uh, apathetic about everything. And then it culminates with this hilarious dig at Towley at the end of the episode, where the kids get their Game Sphere back and they're playing video games on it again, and Towley's there. And one of the kids chimes in and says, Towley, you're the worst character ever. And then Towley's like, I know. It's so funny. It's just a razor sharp barb. It's just a great bit of writing from Matt and Trey, because they realize how stupid the Towley character is. And even in this episode, they have a commercial for like Towley products that I don't think actually existed. It was just some a dig that they threw in there because Towley was popular, and Towley was a character that, they didn't really understand the popularity of. And so in a lot of ways they were kind of trying to distance themselves from Towley. They were trying to be like, Towley is a terrible character, and here's why. And I actually love it. I think it's great that Matt and Trey were that self-aware and had the balls to do that. Uh, Episode 9 is Osama bin Laden has farty pants. This is another one I'm not really super big on. Uh, Part of it, though, I do like. I like the bit with the Afghanistan version of the boys who are trying to give a gift to Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, because they send over some money to Afghanistan. And so the Afghanistan version of the South Park kids, they give them a goat, and the South Park kids can't do anything with the goat because they don't have anywhere to put it. So then they decide they're going to return the goat back to the boys in Afghanistan, but it just winds up with the South Park kids getting stuck on a cargo plane, and they wind up in Afghanistan. And then you have this just really silly fight with Stan and Kyle fighting with the Afghan kids over the reputation of America. And it just points out how dumb that whole thing is. So that was definitely a pointed barb at a lot of the rhetoric that was going on around the time. Because this is after 9/11. And Cartman winds up doing this whole Looney Tunes thing with Osama bin Laden. And that has aged really poorly, if you ask me, with the and I really didn't like that. I thought it was a lazy Looney Tunes parody. And then the whole thing with the goat being Stevie Nicks, like, that's another thing that just confused me. I didn't get it at all. It was just I guess a dig at Stevie Nicks, because I guess Matt Stone and Trey Parker just don't like Stevie Nicks, I guess. Think she sounds like a goat. I don't know. Or sounds and looks like a goat. I have no idea. But that episode was okay. Mainly for the stuff with the Afghan kids and how it was skewering the whole, like, America, how can you not like America and think it's the greatest country? Why do you hate us so much? Like, that I thought was clever. The Osama bin Laden as Elmer Fudd, Cartman as Bugs Bunny stuff, not so much. But this episode's a masterpiece compared to episode 10, which is How to Eat with Your Butt. This is one of the worst episodes of the show, and one of the worst episodes of the season for sure. Uh, this deals with Cartman, who has Kenny do a prank for the school photo where he shows his butt as his head. And Cartman decides to take the joke one step further and gets a missing child poster put on a carton of milk with Kenny's butt face. And this leads to some actual parents who have a deformity where they have butts for faces who come to South Park because they hear about their long lost son. And when Cartman sees the people with butts for faces, he blows a funny fuse, uh, which is what he calls it. But in reality, he actually feels guilty because of the fact that he's leading these parents on. And the milk carton company, they use their technology to find who their long lost son is, and the twist is that it's Ben Affleck. And I'm like, what? Like, what's your beef with Ben Affleck, Matt Stone, and Trey Parker? Like, what's your problem with Ben? Like, oh, he's Ben. It's funny because Ben Affleck is an ass. Like, I don't get it. It wasn't funny. The only part of this episode that worked for me is Butters and the whole subplot of him being grounded for him screwing around with his school photo when all he did is just have like a cowlick. And so he's getting like grounded by his parents. He's getting treated like he's some kind of uh, pariah of sorts. Like he's just being absolutely railroaded and screwed over for the most innocuous, innocent thing on school picture day. Uh, that was the only part of that episode that worked for me. Everything else sucked. Like the whole stuff with the people with butts for faces. It was just not clever. It was just dumb. And then the whole twist being having the identity of the butt boy being Ben Affleck was just, huh? But yeah, I didn't like that episode at all, for the most part. Episode 11 was better, but I still had some problems with this one. This is an episode where like half of it was really good, and then the other half was just lame. Because this one deals with Kyle's cousin, who's also named Kyle, who is a stereotypical nebbish Jew. And Kyle, he has to deal with him because he's staying for a couple weeks, and because he doesn't want him to feel like he's being alienated too much, he ultimately coerces Cartman to behave by having him uh, not insult Kyle and give him crap for being such a stereotypical nebbish Jew by bribing Cartman. He uses a bribe, $40. But of course, Cartman is Cartman, so he screws up in school one day and makes a concentration camp joke and then loses the money. And just the whole thing with Kyle's cousin, and I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to point out how ridiculous and absurd these stereotypes are of Jewish people, but it just came across as very one note to me, and little too on the nose. And then, and I'm not trying to make a Jew joke there. I'm just saying that that's just a term that exists. It just happens to fit for this particular episode. Um, and the best part of the episode, though, is the whole thing with Mr. Garrison and his invention of it, where because the airline service is taking way too long with security checks after September 11th. So then he creates a new form of transportation called it, which is like a gyrosphere where in order for it to work, you stick something up your ass and then move the pedals with your hands and then move it around with your mouth on a phallic shaped object. And the way that the it is set up and just the image of people, with this thing up their ass and doing all this stuff that's just phallic in nature is really silly and honestly really funny. And just the whole bit where it becomes this big thing. Even celebrities are endorsing it. And then ultimately it gets shut down because the airlines get bought out by the government because they're losing so much money. And so that essentially makes it so now the government is involved and they're banning the it. And now everything's just back to square one. That was funny, and I also did like the payoff at the end with Kyle's cousin when he does get like $5 million because of this whole it thing, and as soon as the boys find out about that, they're like, "Oh no 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 no! You shouldn't leave. You shouldn't go anywhere. We want you to stay." And then Kyle was like, "You guys are a bunch of douchebags," and I'm like, "Okay." That was a good payoff, but it still wasn't a particularly great episode. It's definitely one of the weaker episodes of the season. The next episode though is a lot better, and this is episode 12. Here Comes the Neighborhood, and this is such a clever satirical take on racism. It is so funny. It's messed up, and it's so warped, but it's really really funny because this one centers around Token, who is tired of being essentially ostracized because of his wealth, and also, because of how racist Cartman is. And Token, though, doesn't realize that it's due to the racism and the prejudice. He thinks it's just because of the fact that he's rich. So, and he's the only rich kid in South Park. So he winds up attracting wealthier black families to South Park. Will Smith's family, Bill Cosby's family, Snoop Dogg and his kids, so on and so forth. And just, other wealthy black families who ultimately do find it to be a very desirable place to be, because of the skiing potential and just the location of it and the coziness of it. And the townspeople react in a way that is just so prejudiced, but in a way that's just so laughable because they start giving all these rich black people all this crap for being rich. Like they use all the things that white people used to do with black people back in the day in terms of, oh, you can't sit in the back, you can't sit in the front of the bus. Uh, you gotta sit in the back, but instead it's reversed. Like you can't sit with us in the back of the bus. You gotta sit in the front of the bus. Or the whole thing with the, uh, yeah, you're just too rich. So they just use all these different ways to make fun of them because of how rich they are, and the black families are just sitting there like, okay, thanks for the compliments. Even the whole thing with the bus, the Bill Cosby and his family get up there, they're all like, "Oh, this is really nice," and so it's having the opposite effect. So this leads to the South Park denizens to go to the extremes of starting to segregate these wealthy black families from other people in the town, and they're just doing the same thing again, but this time around it's supposedly not about the color of their skin. It's about the inequality of wealth, and because they're so familiar with certain tactics, they just go back to, these old ways of trying to get their way and trying to get rid of black people in their neighborhood that are unwanted. And it ultimately leads to these groups of people in South Park who dress up in sheets to scare the black people away. And there's even points where, oh, we're going to put a T on their lawn and we're going to light it on fire. And the T is for time to leave. Oh, and then it doesn't work. And so then they're all like, we got to go and make a bigger T, put a capital T on the lawn and light it on fire, which is a cross. And then the whole thing with the ghosts, they're going to dress up as ghosts in order to scare the black people away, and they literally look like they're wearing hoods, like they're the KKK, and the mayor is just shaking her head and she's like, "Oh my god." And it actually works though. And that's the absurdity of it, is that, and it just shows how messed up it is that it actually is what causes the black wealthy families to leave South Park, because they buy into the stereotype that the the whites in South Park thought of for them, that they're scared, that they think that if they think that South Park is haunted, they won't want to live there. And so it wasn't necessarily the racist stuff that caused them to leave, like you think. It was the fact that they thought that there actually were ghosts there, and it was haunted. And I'm like, okay, that is very sharp, but at the same time, like, man, that is definitely something that is pretty damn controversial. But that's South Park for you. And then you have the whole thing at the end where Token is getting all this shit now again, but for a different reason, by the kids, and he's pissed off and upset now because, oh man, I wish you just make fun of me for being rich again. But now they just make fun of him and call him a pussy because of the way that he handled everything. So to me, it is a really well written episode about some pretty touchy topics. And then you have episode 13, which is called Kenny Dies. This is another good episode about a touchy topic about stem cell research and abortions. And it opens with a truck carrying a bunch of fetuses for stem cell research crashing. And then Cartman winds up getting all the fetuses. And then Cartman decides that he's going to try to sell the fetuses for profit. And he's turning down all these offers, and ultimately gets an offer from the stem cell research company. And he goes to give them the fetuses, which were supposed to be delivered to them in the first place. And instead, he's not given any payment because they got shut down by the government because of the whole controversy around stem cells. And then at the same time, Kenny is dying of a severe muscular disease. So you have some really genuine emotion from the boys when it comes to Kenny dying. And it's really tragic, and it actually is heart-wrenching. And you kind of, at one point, start to sympathize with Cartman because you fall for it. You think that Cartman actually has any sympathy. But in reality, Cartman is Cartman. So despite what you think he's doing for stem cell research, which is fighting for his friend, because he winds up going through all this trouble to get stem cell research legalized again by singing Heat of the Moment by Asia. And it's also, he can use the stem cells to recreate a Shakey's pizza. It was never for Kenny at all, because Kenny does die at the end of the episode. And it wasn't to help his friend. It was just for his selfish reasons. And the episode even ends with Stan and Kyle beating his ass. And like it's a really, honestly, it's a very tragic episode. But it's really smart and clever in terms of its writing, in terms of how it handles stem cell research. And it just makes a great argument about it, and just really points out how dumb a lot of the controversies were. And then the last episode is another great episode. Butters is a star this time around, which is nice. It's nice to see Butters get his very own episode. And it's just another typical warped, whacked out South Park tale, where Butters, he almost gets killed by his mom. His mom tries to kill him because she winds up discovering a shocking secret about his dad. Because Butters is asked by his mom to go check on his dad, because they're getting ready for, I believe, like an anniversary. And they always go to Bennigan's, his restaurant, and they have this anniversary dinner. And Butters is really excited about that. And he's also trying to find present ideas for his mom. And he winds up finding out that his dad is actually going to these gay bathhouses and having sex. And because Butters is just a kid, he doesn't know how to really, mention this to his mom in a way that is anything but just matter of fact. Tells his mom this, and of course she snaps and just completely loses her mind. And she snaps so badly to the point where she decides to keep everything clean and paints over everything in the house and just completely loses her shit. And she decides she's going to kill Butters by putting him in a car and having him press on the gas and drive into the lake, and then she's going to kill herself. But Butters doesn't die, but the mom and the dad don't know this, so then they start this whole thing of covering up Butters' death and acting as if he was kidnapped by some Puerto Rican guy. And then this then leads to them getting contacted by these other people who have lied to the press about their kids. OJ or just people that they were acquaintances with or they were married to, like O.J. Simpson, Gary Condit, and the Ramseys, which that was interesting, but I can definitely kind of see where Matt Stone and Trey Parker are coming from, because there's a lot of stuff with that case that just doesn't add up. And so Butters' parents wind up joining this group of controversial figures who lied to the press about the murder of their kids. And so they're talking. So initially, I think they're talking about how the kid was kidnapped by some Puerto Rican guy, but then they start talking about it being murder, and then it's just pointing out how just absurd and ridiculous and how bad the lies can get. And Butters goes on this journey, this adventure, after he gets out of the car, and he's got to try to find his way back to South Park, and even has to go down this creepy road. And then eventually he does wind up back home, and his parents come to the press and talk about how they've learned a lesson and shouldn't lie, and they don't suffer any consequences. And everything's just kind of back to normal. But there is a reference to how fucked up everything is, because Butters is really excited about going to Bennigan's. And his friends, Stan and Kyle, they're talking to him, and they're like, you know how messed up this is, right? Like, your mom tried to kill you. Are you gonna be okay? And then Butters is all like, yeah, I'll be fine, and we're gonna go to Bennigan's, and it's like, are you sure? And then Butters is like, no, probably gonna need a lot of therapy. So it was like one of those things where the writing was still willing to have some realism there, which was nice for such a dark, insane episode. Um, so yeah, I think that's a rather fitting way to end this season too, because this is a crazy season with a lot of dark swings by the writers, but it just worked out in its favor so well, and just some really great satire throughout. And most episodes in this are either really good or great. There's just one episode that just sucks, in How to Eat with Your Butt. Still a really enjoyable, fun season overall, and I highly recommend it. And anyway, thank you for watching this review, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.